Good morning, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and I'm making this a little bit earlier in the day, so haven't added any polls that were released today. I've decided to make a quick executive decision. So if you go to, say, national polling, you scroll down. From here down to the bottom is going to be any general election polls, and I've averaged out the vote share for Trump and all the Democratic candidates included in the poll, unless there was only one, in which case I've chosen to ignore it, because that doesn't indicate whether it's candidate strength or just that particular instance. Or just an outlier, or whether it's actually Trump's level of support. So if it's only one, I've ignored it. I'm also ignoring partisan polls. And I'm just going to use 538's definition of partisan, which means conducted on behalf of a political party, rather than looking at the pollster. So I will include public policy polling polls. And if we go, let's use Wisconsin as an example, because there was just one released, and this is what the average wound up being, 49.51. So Trump is doing actually fairly well. There are a few others, but we'll get to that later. The other thing I'm going to do is, at least until we get more general election polling, I'm going to keep this as high as it is, and then I'll drop it to a +1, -1 scale when we get more reliable general election polls. Until then, this is my way of adjusting for the fact that approval rating is weighted, in my opinion, too heavily in my model, at least as of right now. So, anyway, I also wanted to go over, and I was going to do this on Friday, but news kind of made me feel like I just didn't want to. So, I wanted to show you guys how I read polls when I'm not just putting them into my model. So I'll go into a poll and see what it says to see if how I can use that to weigh my forecasts and stuff that aren't just based off of my model. My model just uses a top line result. However, when I'm using them, I try and do them a little bit better. So look at this. This is an all adults poll, so probably not as favorable to Trump as, say, a likely registered voter poll is going to be, meaning it's going to be slightly inaccurate. And people are going to say, well, wait, doesn't that mean it's biased against Trump? And I'm going to say, yeah, a little bit, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're going to say, well, how do you know that a likely registered voter poll is going to favor Trump? Well, I'm going to say historically, likely and registered voter polls have been more favorable to Republicans. Interestingly enough, they've also been more accurate, historically speaking. And Nate Silver on 538 has done all sorts of proofing for that. So that's generally a trustworthy statement. It was done in early March, so it's good to know. But this was also conducted by email. Survey results are weighted by age, race, gender, education, party identification, and region to be representative of the population of adults within the United States. General design effect is due. Okay. Margin of error is 2.6%, 95% confidence level. Okay, so Obviously, the top line results highlights Biden is a stronger candidate. Sanders is a little bit above the weaker candidates, and apparently O'Rourke is one of the very weaker ones, and Booker is pretty weak. But I don't just look at that. I want to see why that is. And then there are a bunch of other questions, right? But let's go down. And let's look at the crosstabs. And we'll use Joe Biden as an example, right? But I did this for every single one of them. Who would you vote for? Okay. Here's the top line result, 48-43 in favor of Biden, with 9% undecided. And you look at the party identification, not a lot of Democrats will cross over and vote for Trump. Not that many more Republicans will cross over and vote for Biden. Amongst independents, Trump has a single point lead with 13% undivided. There is a gender gap, but that's to be expected. More women are undecided regarding Biden than men. Of course, Biden does much better among younger voters. However, middle-aged voters tend to be a better demographic for Trump, and older voters really like Trump. Younger voters, again, obviously favor Biden. White voters tend to favor Trump, and that's to be expected. But here's the interesting one. African American support. This is more than double what Trump got in 2016, and this is more than a Republican has gotten of the African American vote, I think, since 1960, but I could be wrong about that. It may have been slightly later than that, but it couldn't have been much later. And honestly, if Trump is getting 19% of the African American vote, he's winning the election. I honestly don't get how this is the top line result if Trump is getting 20% of the African American vote. I really don't. Especially with the Democrat only getting 70%. With 12% undecided, that's, yeah. This is a little bit this is probably what you would expect with polling from Hispanic voters, though I've seen it in the upper 30s in some polls that are reputable, but a lot of people are saying that's an outlier, and for the most part I'm inclined to agree. I'd expect around 30% Hispanic support. So this is slightly below, and this is also slightly below what I'd expect, so that's reputable. But this was the one that surprised me, and going through, scroll down, against Warren, similar percentage point, except instead of 69%, it's 59%, which that's a real shock. Whites favor Trump even more in that scenario. Much less of a gender gap. Interestingly enough, against Kamala Harris, same, much less of a gender gap as well. Again, you go, this one's versus Bernie Sanders. A fairly wide gender gap here. Again, this should be a little bit of a shock. This one's O'Rourke. Trump actually cracked 20% amongst the African American vote in this one. And, you know, going through, you can make guesses based off of allocation of undecided voters. And of course, don't just rely on one poll. Relying on one poll is ridiculous because it's just not going to give you the reliability that looking at a bunch of polls will. So let's go up here. Let's go to general election. Let's find another that was a nationwide poll. Here we go. Let's see if we can pull up the crosstabs here. Okay, that's Congress. Okay, so ethnicity. 16% of African Americans approve. Actually, that's a large amount. For a Republican, that is a large amount. And you look at this, you get your standard age gap. Gender gap is what you would expect. There's also a racial difference based off of what you would expect. Obviously, Republicans approve, Democrats disapprove, generally speaking. You go over here. This is much more in line with what you would expect if the election for president were held today. Trump isn't winning white voters by as much. There's a massive gender gap here. Obviously, younger voters are going to favor the Democrat. But interestingly enough, Trump doesn't win a single age group, which I find strange. A lot are undecided. Maybe that's just lack of wanting to admit that they support Donald Trump. Here's an interesting one. Trump's at 15% if you go with Cory Booker. Against Kamala Harris, Trump is at 60% for African American vote, which I find shocking, to be honest. 13% against Sanders. Again, this is all more than a Republican has gotten in a long time of the African American vote. The 10% is the only one that you would expect to be absolutely certain of. And you can go through and I'm a little skeptical of this poll, but I included it anyway. The reason why I'm skeptical of it is not because of these top line results. But if I remember correctly, Quinnipiac always gets adjusted in favor of the Republican because it tends to discount the Republicans' chances. And, oh good, I get crosstabs. Nice. Okay, that's to be expected. Okay. Was it a likely voter? Yeah, it was a registered voter poll. So it's a little bit more accurate, but at the same time, there is reason to be. I would believe this for O'Rourke. I 100% am willing to believe the O'Rourke one. The Biden one, I'm a little skeptical, but this far out, you can't 100% trust every single individual poll. You have to look at them as a group and see what they're generally reporting. I'm really pissed at Emerson College because I don't want to go tab navigating to find the crosstabs. Arizona, we need to wait until the primary's over, obviously, to see what Democratic support really is. Same thing with this North Carolina poll. And sorry I went through how to read polls and went way in depth, but let's look at my model. So my model is saying this is what we should expect from the election as of this week. And that was because I have decided to start compressing every week's poll. That way it doesn't weigh a poll too heavily as time goes on. So this is his approval for March, and generally it's gone up, and it'll probably continue to do so. And this has gone up from last month, and then in February he went up to where we would expect it, and the 2018 approval rating mean he's back up to where he was last year in terms of approval rating. And I'm only going to update what my personal forecast is when there's something to change, or at the start of each month. I'm not sure which yet, but this is an extremely competitive election. There's 4 states for each candidate, which are in the tilt category, and that indicates a very competitive election. And leaning states, there's a good amount of leaning states, which is anything within 10%. And those are really the competitive ones. Anything that's likely is within 15% here. And those are, yeah, they could happen, but more than likely not. Anything that's safe, no. Anyway, thank y'all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.